talked a little bit about next best alternative, but let's define it now. So your next best alternative is what you'll do and what your prospect will do if you can't find common ground between the two of you. So remember, the common ground is there's some future possible situation where both of us can exchange something and be happy. If we can't find that, we're probably not going to do nothing. We're going to do something else. And that something else is the next best alternative. So you're interviewing for a job. And you're interviewing for jobs with 5 different companies. Let's say 2 companies extend you an offer. And you really want to work for company 1, but you don't like the location, or they're not paying you enough, or there's some factor that's not attractive for you. If the company can't make that offer attractive enough for you to work for them, you're going to go work for company 2, right? So using next best alternative language, company number 2 is your next best alternative to company 1. Similarly, as a business, you have the opportunity to work with potentially lots of different customers. And so your next best alternative, if you don't land a particular prospect, is maybe to work with somebody else. So it's important to understand that for every single decision that somebody makes, they have a next best alternative. It may be going to another service provider. It may be looking at a slightly different option. It may be doing nothing in this particular case. But understanding the other party's next best alternative is really important when it comes to sales and negotiation. Because if your offer is not at least as good, preferably better than their next best alternative, they're not going to do business with you. So doing your research and understanding what that next best alternative is really helps you craft the offer that they're going to find more attractive than their alternatives. Now, in every negotiation, and this is a super important point, in every negotiation, the power in the negotiation lies with the party that is able and willing to walk away from a bad deal. So if you are the one in the negotiation that says, it has to meet a certain threshold or I'm doing something else, and the other party wants the deal to happen more than you want it to happen, that gives you the negotiation power. So part of the calculus is not only understanding what the other party's next best alternative is, it's understanding what yours is, and trying to find a situation in which the negotiation reaches a point where doing the deal is better than your next alternative. And if you're willing to walk away, you're far more likely to get a better deal.
Next best alternative. Questions for reflection. What's your next best alternative to the deal you're considering? What is the other party's next best alternative? Is your offer better than the other party's next best alternative?
Now, when a negotiation is made, you can negotiate with all sorts of different things. And the thing that most people think of first in negotiating with is money, right? I give you something, you give me money. That is not the only currency that exists in a negotiation. And this is an idea called the 3 universal currencies. So the first universal currency, resources. Money is a resource, right? But you can think of other resources. So think of something like, I will give you this product if you give me an ounce of gold. Similar negotiation is happening. I give you a resource in exchange for a resource, but we're not dealing with money. We're dealing with something else. Any resource you can think of, natural resource, any kind of tangible item that you can trade, is a resource type negotiation. It's a currency. Now, the second universal currency is time. How much time is it going to take? So think of an employment contract as a negotiation. I will give you resources in the form of salary or an hourly wage in exchange for your time and energy working on what I want you to work on, in exchange of resources for time. Now, if you say, well, I would really like to only work 3 days a week, and your employer says, okay, but I'm going to cut your salary by X% to allow you to do that, you're negotiating an exchange of resources for time, just in a different amount. So time is a currency in and of itself. The third universal currency is one that most people don't think about, but may actually be the most important, which is flexibility. In this trade, what else can you not do as a result of agreeing to this deal? So for example, take an employment contract. In an employment contract is saying, while you are working for this company, you are not going to be working on another project, or you are not going to be working for a competitor, or you are not going to be working on XYZ. Your opportunities are limited as long as this agreement is in place. Now, it's important to understand that when someone asks you for an increase or a reduction in flexibility, you have the ability to ask for an increase or a reduction in flexibility or time or money. So for example, in the negotiation for my book, part of that contract was an agreement on flexibility. I was giving my publisher the exclusive worldwide right to the commercialization of this manuscript that I had created. So I can't take the same manuscript and sell it myself. I can't sell it to another publisher. I can't do that because I've agreed to work with them and nobody else. In exchange for that, the monetary part of the negotiation went up because I was giving up a lot of things in order to give them that reduction in flexibility that they wanted. So thinking about a negotiation in terms of all three factors, time and money and flexibility, gives you a lot more options than just thinking about the time or the money part. Because if there's some flexibility that would really be a good thing for you, you can ask for it. And if you're willing to make the trade-off in either time or flexibility or resources, you can negotiate something that would be a good deal for you.
I work with a global team, so I work a lot with folks in Asia and Europe. And so my schedule is oftentimes early morning, during the day, and late at night or overnight in some cases, especially if there's a specific deliverable. And so I talked to Josh about it, and he asked what the flexibility was. So are there times when you could set up boundaries where you could escape? And I talked to my boss about it, and he was extremely accommodating. So I'm able to take 2 hours out every Friday afternoon and volunteer at the food bank. So I do that every week, and everybody knows that they can't reach me at that time. And if there's a crisis, somebody else handles it. And so it was really great to talk to you about that and realize that I can ask that question and I can look for other opportunities to find balance.
Yeah, or taking a couple hours in the middle of the day when it's quiet to go for a bike ride.
Yeah, absolutely.
Same deal. And a lot of times, even in negotiations that have already been made, you may have more flexibility than you initially realize. I think it was on the volunteering and riding your bike in the middle of the day. That wasn't even a renegotiation with your boss because you already had the flexibility to do it. You just weren't doing it. So clarifying how much flexibility you actually have and exploring all the different things that you could do will give you a lot of opportunities with no renegotiation required.
I actually, on a job offer several years ago, when they offered me a position, they'd seen what I could do, so they knew what my value was. So when they presented the job offer, and I said, well, I would like to negotiate this job offer, and I said, however, this salary is acceptable as long as we can talk about the hours.
Yes.
And I was able to carve out the hours to make it more family friendly for me. And so I presented it, if you can't do this, then my expectation is
Yes.
I'm going to want a higher salary. And it worked.
Yeah.
When you're hiring people, it's a really good way to offset if you don't want to pay them as much too. None of my employees have set hours, set vacation times. It's completely up to them. And so I use that when I'm negotiating how much we're going to pay, because if you can work from home, work from wherever you want, there's a lot of value in that.
Yes.
And I can talk about that as part of, yeah, you can maybe get a job somewhere else paying more, but you have to be there at 8 o'clock, you get 1 hour for lunch, you do not get to leave till 5 o'clock. If they want to send you and travel somewhere, you don't get to negotiate. You have to be back at your desk at 8 o'clock on Monday, all of those things. And so I think of it in value as that, there's a lot of that too if you end up hiring people.
Yes. So by thinking in terms of all of the three currencies instead of just one or two, you open up a lot of options for a mutually beneficial transaction that you may not think of at first.
I take the staff on Fridays to go see movies. Friday morning movie in LA is the best ever. No one's there, it's 10 a.m., it's cool, it's dark, and we go see a movie, especially during the summer. The big stuff is coming out because we talk about story all day and all night, so it's a really fun thing, really fun.
The three universal currencies: Questions for reflection. Do a quick audit. What resources, effort, and flexibility do you currently have at your disposal? Which of these currencies would you like to increase? How can you trade for more of the currency you value most?
Now, just like there are 3 currencies in negotiation, there are actually 3 phases to a negotiation. And most people, when they think about selling or they think about negotiation, the picture they have in their mind is sitting down across the table from the prospect and the wheelin' dealin' part, right? It's important to understand that the actual discussion of the deal is only one part of the negotiation. And by the time you get to that part, 2/3 of the negotiation is already done, and you may not even realize it. So there was a wonderful book that came out a couple years ago called 3D Negotiation by David Lax and James Zebidius. And they walked through this process of a negotiation actually has 3 dimensions, and all 3 are equally important. The first dimension is called the setup, which is basically setting the stage for a positive negotiation. So what are the environmental factors surrounding the negotiation right now? Who might you talk to? What might you talk about? How much research can you do about the type of negotiation that you're going to be going into? So you can think about the setup as kind of stacking the deck in your favor before you ever start talking to anyone, right? You're doing your research, you're making sure the environmental conditions of the discussion are going to be conducive to you getting the deal that you want. The second dimension is the structure. So that's the terms of the proposal. So what are you going to propose? How are you going to propose it? How are you going to frame it? What order do you want to discuss things in? And how are you going to structure the discussion in terms of letting your prospect know what they need to understand and doing it in a way that's going to convince them of the value of your offer? So you're pre-thinking about the discussion before it actually happens. And you're structuring your proposal, just like we were talking about the ABC idea in negotiation, in terms of giving your prospect 3 options and making sure they increase in value over time. That's part of the structure dimension of negotiation. You're thinking about how to present the deal to your prospect. And then, and only then, when you've set the environment in your favor, you've thought a lot about how you're going to present the deal to the prospect, then you sit down and discuss it. And the discussion is just presenting the offer to the other party, and you're working through the details. You're asking them questions, you're gathering more information, you're seeing the areas of potential common ground and what is going to look like a situation that's going to result in a transaction. That all happens in the discussion phase.
So your setup could be like in software, we do roadshows where we'll set up appointments with different large companies, Apple, Google, whatever.
Yes.
Because we know someone in there, and then we'll go in and do a presentation about our technology. Would that be
Yes.
a classic idea of a setup, because you're not trying to sell them anything yet?
Yes, exactly.
Show them what you have and what your offer is, what your value proposition.
Yeah, and doing research into what they're actively working
Right.
on and what they want and what the pain points are. Yeah, that's all the setup phase. And then you're taking what you learn in the setup phase to structure what a proposal could look like, and then you discuss it. So just like thinking of the 3 currencies in the negotiation, thinking about the 3 different phases or the 3 different dimensions that you're going through that lead up until the actual discussion of the deal, you can start thinking about ways to prepare your proposal in a way that's likely to be accepted.
The 3 dimensions of negotiation. Questions for reflection. Have you thought through the setup of your deal? How will you structure and frame your proposal? What's your plan walking into the discussion phase? How can you prepare as thoroughly for this negotiation as possible, given your available time?
Now, the next idea, which we alluded to a little bit when we were talking about the agency form of value. So a person or a party that sells something that they don't own, but they do the marketing and the sales process for somebody that has something of value. There's a particular type of relationship that an agent has in the sales process. And this is an idea called a buffer. So you can think of a buffer, generally, it's kind of something that comes between one thing and another thing. An agent is a buffer between a buyer and a seller. An agent provides some separation there. And that separation can be extremely valuable in the negotiation of a deal and in helping particularly a seller get favorable terms in a negotiation or in a sales process. So agents, attorneys, advisors, all of these people can provide some separation between you and ultimately the customer in a way that is very beneficial. And the reason that's beneficial sometimes is, take a professional sports player, athlete. If the athlete tries to negotiate their own contract, there are all sorts of things that could happen, right? Because it's a complex deal. You have to negotiate the contract and understand all of the legal terms that are used in there. You have to understand a lot about the market and what terms are fair and what other players are getting. And there's a lot of domain-specific knowledge that that particular athlete might not have, both in terms of the financial parts of the negotiation and in terms of the legal parts of the negotiation. In the same way, if the athlete tries to negotiate their own contract, and they go to the owner of the team or the owner's representatives, and they play major hardball, there's a significant risk that the other party is going to start to not think very highly of that particular athlete. Like, this person is a pain, we don't want to deal with them, and it torpedoes the deal before it even happens. So by hiring an agent and by hiring an attorney, both the agent and the attorney know to ask about things that the athlete may not know to ask for, and they have information about what's standard and what's not, what's negotiable and what's not, but they can also negotiate harder on the athlete's behalf than the athlete can for themselves. So by providing some separation, the athlete ultimately gets a better deal that more than pays for the agent and the attorney, and both sides are better off because there's some separation between the parties. So using buffers intelligently, particularly where there are things like legal or financial aspects, the more domain-specific knowledge you need in a negotiation, the more hiring a buffer makes it worth it. However, there are some caveats here, because having a buffer creates a risk. Some buffers, so like an attorney, may be paid on a billable hour basis. And the best thing for the buffer party may not be the best thing for the person they're representing. In the case of, let's say, an attorney who is paid by the billable hour, racks up tons of unnecessary billable hours because that's what they have an incentive to do, right? In the same way, an agent has an incentive if they're compensated on a commission or a fee when the transaction goes through. The agent has an incentive to see a deal go through, even if it's in the best interest of the party not to have a deal go through. So if you, for example, work with a real estate agent and they're showing you around houses in a particular neighborhood that you're interested in, the agent will probably not tell you, you know, it's probably in your best interest to rent right now. Their perspective is, the question is not whether you should buy a house, it's a question of which house should you buy right now, right? Because that's their incentive. And so buffer parties can be very, very beneficial as long as you understand what the interests of the buffer party are themselves. Now, if possible, and this works in the majority of situations except when the buffer's interests are almost perfectly aligned with your own. So if you're negotiating something like compensation, and your buffer gets compensated more if you get compensated more, then things like commissions can work. However, if possible, working with a buffer who's willing to accept a flat fee regardless of the outcome, or regardless of what you ultimately decide, can often bring about better results. Because by paying them a flat fee, they are working for you. They're going to be compensated no matter what. They do not have a stake in the negotiation that's underway. So if no deal is done, great. If a deal is done, great. They're going to provide the advice because that's part of their job. It's why you're hiring them. But you don't necessarily have the clash of incentives that might otherwise work. So for example, this is very common in the financial planning industry now. Instead of hiring a financial consultant or a broker who is compensated on a percentage of your assets or a percentage of the total transactions that happen in your account, you just pay them a fee every year. And you pay them the fee to offer you the advice and perspective and consulting that they bring. And that can get you a better result than a percentage or a commission. One last thing about buffers. Don't let your buffer, if you're working with one, replace your own judgment. In the end, it's still your decision. You have the final call. And even if your buffer is recommending something that you don't understand or aren't comfortable with, you don't have to do it. So you're not hiring a buffer to abdicate responsibility for making a decision. You're hiring a buffer to help you make the right decision and to make a decision on the best favorable terms for you.
Buffer. Questions for reflection. Does this negotiation situation call for a buffer party? If so, are your buffer's incentives closely aligned with your own?
Now, we're going to start getting into the psychology of selling. And the psychology ends up being very important because we are human beings. How we think about the process of going through a sales process or a negotiation has massive results on the final outcome. So there are a couple of psychological factors that play very heavily into sales and negotiation. And the first one is an idea called reciprocation. Reciprocation is the desire most people feel to quote unquote pay back what they've received. And it's one of the most powerful and influential psychological tendencies underlying our human cooperation. So if you help me, I feel a responsibility to help you in some way later if you need it, or if I can see you need it, or if you ask for it. And the more I have helped you, the more you're going to want to reciprocate that help somewhere down the line. So just like any psychological tendency, this can be used for great good or for great ill. So the positive aspect of this is reciprocation, and there are thousands of psychological studies over and over and over that prove that reciprocation is one of the most powerful forces impacting how people choose to behave. So in one sense, reciprocation is the business case for generosity. The more you help people, the more giving you are, the more people feel like you have already benefited their life in some way. When you later go through a sales process or you later go through a negotiation, the other party is going to feel some tendency to reciprocate what they have already received. That's a really good thing. The reason that human beings are such a cooperative group of folks is largely because of reciprocation. We evolved to help each other. Now, reciprocation can also be used to manipulate. So by giving people things, by doing things you might not otherwise do, you also increase the chance that people are going to reciprocate. And here's the reason why that happens. Human reciprocation is not tied to scale. It's tied to an instance of helping, no matter how great or small that help is. So, for example, well documented, when you walk into a car dealership and the car salesman says, "Can I get you a cup of coffee? Can I get you a soda? Can I get you a water? I have some cookies here. Would you like some?" A very small gift, right? That coffee probably costs a maximum of 5 cents, maybe 10 if you include the cup. By providing that cup of coffee, you're statistically more likely to purchase a car in the first place, and then an extended warranty, and then the floor mats, and then leather seats, and then all of the things, the upsells that the car salesman asks for, because there's a reciprocative relationship already. They gave you something, and so you give them something in return, and it's independent upon the scale. So in terms of using this intentionally and using this ethically, the more value you're able to provide to your prospects up front, you're doing two great things. A, you're helping a lot of other people in a way that they're going to appreciate, but you're also making it far more likely that they are going to see the benefits of what you do and it will reciprocate in terms of a sale. Can you think of any examples of this that you've seen?
They do it at the bank when you're not necessarily opening up a new account, but when you go to talk to a banker, they'll bring you a cup of coffee.
Yep. Why?
Because now they sell insurance that you could have all your stuff at one place, and they're making your life easier. And I just recall that recently because I had that happen. So.
Yeah.
I see this all the time. They're trying to give me a gift so that I would be more comfortable. And I almost rebel against it now because it's not genuine. Like if they were genuine about asking, is there in any kind of sales route, is genuineness a multiplier?
Yes, it is. It's a big multiplier on this. Because you're right, if somebody feels like they are being subtly manipulated by being given something, People pick up on that very, very quickly. I think the thing in terms of using reciprocation, both for the benefits as well as doing it in a genuine way, the best thing for you is to assume that you're never going to get anything back. So, for example, we were talking about the benefits of providing free samples or free content or free information or free value. There's a massive benefit to doing that if it's done as part of a sales process or something that ultimately leads to a sales process. But in the doing of it, psychologically for yourself, assume that it's not going to definitely lead to a sale. You're just giving it to give it.
You're not owed anything.
You're not owed anything, exactly. Because it's the owed part that people pick up on and people feel manipulated by. The very best thing from you as the business owner, in your prospect's mind, the very best impression they can take away is this is a good, genuine, helpful person who cares about what is in my best interest or what I care about. And by providing some value up front, whatever that value might be, if you do it in a genuine way without the expectation that you are now owed something, that is most likely to lead to that impression or that result.
I'm always, when their traffic is down, what have you, or their base is down, send them money to spend. Send them a $20 gift certificate, send them a $30, because they're selling stuff that's $150, $200, $250.
Right.
And then they get into the whole mindset is they get into all the legal copy. You must spend this, you must do this, not good on sale merchandise, not good on all this kind of thing. So again, it completely takes away. And when people get out of that mindset, and Kohl's just did this, has done this very successfully, and they do it now at least once a month. We get one at our house.
Yeah.
And they send you a $10 or $15, whatever it is, and in big writing under, this is good on absolutely anything you want. No restrictions, no anything.
Amazon has started doing the same thing.
And it fosters
works.
such goodwill with people, even though they might not spend it, they're going to go there anyway because they know that.
Right. And the end result of all of this is the prospect must feel that you have their best interests at heart, period. And if you can provide them some value up front, it goes a long way to establishing that trust. And if you establish the trust, you're far more likely to ultimately get to a transaction, whether it comes immediately or whether it comes sometime down the road.
I've had clients that it's just not time for them to hire me. I've had a client that she was just really tight on cash and she needed what I did to immediately make a difference. And I'm like, it's not going to work. And then I walked her through very specific things she could do on her own that would implement a lot of what we were going to implement for her anyway. And here's a way you can get started, and maybe in a year, you'll be in a place where you can come back to me. And so I'll still take the time. Just last week, I was talking to a client who we worked with before, and I was just, again, giving her some advice of like, well, here's what you need to do next, knowing that as she got to the next level, she's going to come back and hire me. So I'll get on the phone and just kind of follow up and help them. The great example is when it's just not time for them to hire us. It's not worth them spending the money on us. And so I'll still take the time to tell them what they should be doing next, knowing that not only when it comes time they are going to hire me because of that, because they trust me now, but also they're going to tell their friends. They're going to refer me even though they've never worked with me because they now trust. And so that looking out for somebody else, it has to be genuine. I want every author to be successful, whether they give me money or not. I still have to feed my family and run a profitable business, but I want authors to be successful independent of whether I get money. One lady's trying to start a publishing type business, so we're not the right fit for her, but she was asking me advice, so I took the time to just kind of walk her through what she should be doing next and what she should be doing marketing wise. But if her venture is successful, she's going to have authors and they're going to need help. And
Totally.
so helping and talking people out, and that's where, if we go back to the car salesman, and I've heard stories of car salesmen that do this, so this isn't a new idea, but if you walk in and a car salesman starts talking to you and realizes you can't afford this car, you shouldn't be buying this, and they tell you don't buy the car, they're going to be the most trusted car salesman in the area.
Yeah.
And because it's like, they'll help you. They care more about you than their pocketbook.
Yeah, and that gets back to Zig Ziglar's idea of the salesman is an assistant buyer. And preferably an assistant buyer that is actively helping people in any way that they can.
Well, what his most famous quote, I think, is,
You can have anything that you want as long as you help other people get what they want.
Reciprocation. Questions for reflection. Are you providing value to others with no strings attached? Are you asking other people for help when you need it? The next idea, which also is a psychological tendency that has to do with trust, is called a damaging admission. And a damaging admission means acknowledging potential risks or drawbacks an offer may have. So people know that nothing in the world is perfect. They know that. There's a tendency for most particularly beginning salespeople to pretend like what they are offering is perfect in all ways, at all times, in all conditions. This is the greatest thing since sliced bread, and you can do no wrong by buying this thing. As soon as people hear that, their barriers go up because they know that's not true. They know there are drawbacks or limitations or imperfections. And so a damaging admission is, as a business owner who is extending an offer to somebody else, a damaging admission is just recognizing and saying the truth. This is not right for you if, or this is not the best thing that could ever be. And what that does, instead of decreasing the risk or decreasing how much people want something, it actually makes people trust you more. Because you're not trying to sugarcoat it, you're telling exactly as it is, and because you said something that is not immediately in your personal best interest, their ability to trust what you're saying is true goes up dramatically. So being upfront regarding your drawbacks and your trade-offs and the situations in which this is not the best thing for you is, paradoxically, the best way to make people trust that you do have the ability to deliver what you say you will deliver.
I was applying to a big company and there was lots of pressure to make sure the hire was right. So we were talking and everything, and I said to him, let's do this for 3 months, and if it doesn't work, you can fire me.
Yeah.
And he went, oh, yeah, okay. And totally, you know, the last thing you say in a business when you're applying for a job is, well, you can fire me, right? It just came out like the right thing to say. I hadn't thought of it beforehand.
Like Tim's example of saying, I'm not right for you. Based on where you are right now, I'm not right for you. Has anyone had the circumstance of telling a prospective client that and then they actually still want to work with you, or they want to work with you even more? It's a damaging admission. And it's such a counterintuitive thing, right? It's like, particularly when you're just getting started, it's like, well, I don't want to give my prospects the idea that I'm not good. And this kind of gets rooted in our insecurities about what we're offering, right? I don't want to admit that this thing is not great in some particular way. But by doing that, you actually make people want what you have even more. The takeaway close is something that's related to this. It's a more strategic technique where you actually plan to say, well, you know what, I don't think this is going to be right for you at a certain point in the negotiation to increase their interest. Because what that does, that's a social signal that in terms of common ground, you are the party who is willing to walk away. Or you are more willing to walk away than the other party. So that's a little bit of a psychological power play that does work in certain situations. So yes, don't be afraid to admit your faults. They're not as bad as you seem. It's actually a benefit.
Damaging admission. Questions for reflection. Who is your offer not right for? What are the drawbacks or trade-offs of your offer? Would a damaging admission increase the trust your customers have in you?
Now, let's say you have a prospect in front of you. They're really interested, but they haven't said yes yet. This is an idea called barriers to purchase. So they're sitting in front of you, they're interested, but they're still hesitating for some reason. There's still something that's like, I hear what you're saying, I think this would be valuable, but I'm not ready to buy yet. Or, no, I can't afford that. When you sell for any period of time, you start to hear all sorts of excuses, right? Well, this seems really great, but. That but, fill in the blank, is what's called a barrier to purchase. There's something standing in the way between you and the prospect and a successful transaction. So the selling and negotiating process is largely, aside from the marketing aspect, so making them aware and making them interested, the sales and negotiation process is largely a matter of identifying the barriers to purchase that exist, where they exist, and doing what you can to eliminate or alleviate them. And there's a very handy checklist of barriers to purchase that appear in almost every sale. And the first one is what's called loss aversion, which we'll talk about in detail here in a minute. Loss aversion is this feeling like people hate to lose. They hate to feel like they made this stupid decision, right? So the whole "it costs too much" objection is an expression of, I feel like I may be making a bad decision here. I may lose something. I may feel stupid. Therefore, I'm hesitating. Costs too much. The second is, it won't work. So I don't believe that I will actually get the benefits that you're telling me I will get. I'm not fully convinced that that's true yet. And then there's a subtle variation on that, which is, it won't work for me. So I believe it'll work. I believe that you actually can provide the benefits that you're providing, but it's not, for whatever reason, going to work for me. Number 4 is, I can wait. It's not urgent. I can afford to wait and do this later, or maybe not do it at all. And number 5 is, it's too difficult. It's too hard. Requires too much work. I don't have the time. So when you are in a sales process, you'll hear variations on each of these 5 themes over and over and over again. And because these are patterns, as the seller, that gives you a distinct advantage because you can anticipate it. And you can actively plan. So when a prospect says, well, seems like that's pretty expensive, you will have a response. Or, I can wait on that. You can have a response. Or, it won't work for me. You can plan to show them exactly how it will work for them. So this is part of the deal setup and the deal structure, parts of the dimensions of negotiation, right? You're planning that most people will have some variant of these objections before a transaction is made. So you're just pre-preparing a response that tells them either the objection isn't true or it's not relevant for them. And if you can do that, and you break down all of their barriers that they're experiencing, that will lead to a transaction. But until you break those barriers down, they're still going to hesitate. And if they hesitate too long, they're not going to buy. Now, one important caveat. Sometimes people throw up barriers to purchase because they are not the one who actually has the power to make the purchase. So, I don't have money may literally be that. Like, I am not the one with the checkbook who can write you a check for this right now. So the golden rule of sales and negotiation is you should never negotiate with someone who is not the ultimate decision maker. This is where having partners, or in terms of a buying things perspective, it helps to have a partner or agent or an attorney or someone else that you have to consult with before a decision is made.
It's a buffer.
Yeah, it's a buffer. And that allows you to step back and think about the sales process if you're still not quite sure. But you as the seller, part of the deal setup is making sure you have access to the ultimate decision maker, because otherwise you're probably wasting your time.
Barriers to purchase. Questions for reflection. What kinds of objections might your prospects have to your offer? Can you anticipate which barriers are preventing your prospects from saying yes? How can you prepare to alleviate each prospect's objections to remove as many barriers as possible?
Now, another part of the psychological aspect of buying and selling, particularly buying, is, as we mentioned, the whole "it costs too much" objection is people hate to lose. They hate to feel stupid. They hate to feel taken advantage of. They hate to feel like they didn't get the very best deal possible. And so this is a common enough objection with pretty much everything that it helps to have a standard strategy or a standard response to deal with it. Because if you don't deal with it, it will rear its ugly head over and over and over again. And that strategy is called risk reversal. So risk reversal is a strategy that transfers some or all of the risk of a transaction from the purchaser to the seller. So the seller agrees to make things right in advance if the purchaser doesn't end up satisfied. So whenever you buy something, you're giving up something, right? You're usually giving up money or giving up access to some other resource. And that, just by the nature of going through a transaction, there's always the risk that that could end up being a bad decision. So risk reversal is when the seller says, you know what, I understand that purchasing feels risky, so here's what I'm going to do. Every risky element that you could perceive of in this transaction, I'm going to take that risk away from you and I'm going to put it all on me. My favorite example of this in terms of markets and industries is the bedding industry. You ever seen in like the Sunday circular of a paper, these mattress companies that'll be like 365-day, 110% money-back guarantee. You could sleep on this thing for a year minus 1 day, and if you decide you don't like it, you just give us a call and we will send out a crew and we will pick up the bed and you can pick out something. The guarantees are just over the top. And you think like, how can this mattress company like afford to have this crazy, insane guarantee? And here's how they can do it. So if you're in the market for a bed, you're only going to purchase one bed unless you have multiple rooms, right? So you're only dealing with one company. The mattress company is selling to many, 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 many buyers. And the vast majority of those buyers are going to have a good experience. Once the bed goes home, it's never coming back. But the perceived risk in buying something that I'm not going to like or I'm going to think is a bad decision, that weighs heavily and is a major barrier to people buying the bed in the first place. So by offering that crazy guarantee up front, they will lose money on a certain very small percentage of their customers. But they're going to make so much more money by breaking down that barrier that they're going to sell several orders of magnitude more mattresses than they would in the first place. So this strategy can be applied to pretty much everything that results in a net increase of profit. So you will almost always have more profit if you institute a risk reversal strategy than not. Typically, the stronger the risk reversal strategy in terms of what you promise, the better the results. Here's where it gets tricky. As sellers, we have loss aversion too. We hate to feel that a customer took advantage of us, or they played us, or they planned to take us up on this crazy guarantee when they made the purchase in the first place. And that risk keeps business owners from doing risk reversal, because we hate to lose too, right? But because we're selling to more than one buyer, in aggregate, yeah, you're going to have a couple people who will totally take advantage if you plan on it. But 99.9% of your customers will be more likely to buy from you because you put the strategy in place in the first place. So it's not as risky as it psychologically feels to institute, but by instituting it, you'll make more money.
So if you have a product and there's not a lot of mechanics to the product, it's relatively straightforward. Is there a situation to share the risk? So to say,
sure,
we'll give a 30, 60, 90-day guarantee on this. If you don't like it, send it back. We just ask that you send it all back.
Yes.
And then you pay for the shipping back.
Yes, and that's an example of using risk reversal with a very small element of something we'll talk about in systems, which is friction. So the more effort you ask someone to go through in the case of a return, so going to the post office and mailing it is asking them to exert some effort. That represents some friction in the process of actually taking you up on your guarantee.
So that they've got some skin in that game. Or
yes. So even if they're ultimately going to get all of their money back and plus some, they're still going to have to spend at least some effort or some thought. Yeah, exactly. There's totally a psychological benefit to yourself of doing this by saying, I'm making a big promise here, and I have to deliver upon that promise or it's going to be really bad for me in a lot of different ways. And the way that I found testing a whole bunch of different ways to talk about risk reversal in a believable way is I now always include the sentence, if you are not completely happy with this transaction for any reason, I don't feel I've earned your money. And you get it all back. Because it's true. If you're not happy with the transaction, I haven't earned my keep, you get it all back, period. And that it's very straightforward, people understand it, and it decreases the risk people feel in choosing to make a decision dramatically.
Risk reversal. Questions for reflection. How can you convince your prospects that this is a zero-risk transaction? What risks can you transfer from the prospect to yourself?
Last idea in sales is a concept called reactivation. So in thinking about the selling process, most of the time when people visualize this, they imagine selling things to new customers, people they have never seen before. But a lot of times, you can make more sales simply by contacting people who have already purchased from you and asking them to purchase again. It's an idea called reactivation, the process of convincing past customers to buy from you again. And the wonderful thing about reactivation is it's faster, it's easier, it's simpler, it costs less than trying to contact new folks because you already know who your customers are. You probably already have their contact information. You already know something about what they want or what they have liked in the past. And you can probably, if you sit back and think about it, think of some other things that they would be interested in purchasing again. This works particularly well for subscription businesses that have lapsed customers, customers that for whatever reason have dropped off. You can contact them again with a new offer and bring them back into the fold. So reactivation is one of the most effective things you can do if you already have an existing body of customers to increase profits, because you can do it quickly, it's inexpensive, and a lot of people who had a good experience with your company will be happy to come back into the fold if you just give them a reminder and an offer that is attractive to them. So it's one of those things that if you're not already doing it, think about a way that you can do it. It's much more effective if you've already asked people permission to follow up. That's one of the reasons why permission is such an important strategy. On the marketing side, permission gives you access to a reactivation strategy on the sales side. So regardless of what your permission strategy looks like, you should always be asking people for permission to follow up, because that will net you more sales on the front end and more sales on the back end through reactivation.
We've really increased our sales significantly over the past year by hired a new PhD chemist salesperson. And instead of just putting her on new accounts, we put her on some old accounts for her to go in and further penetrate those.
Yep.
You know, because she does very consultative sales and she has the knowledge base. And so she really went into our customers that we'd had for a great deal of time. And she's a very good salesperson at getting to that next person in the organization and the next division in the organization. And so she really, if you look at it, the comment was she hasn't established many new customers. Well, she's greatly penetrated the ones that we've had, and if you look at the increase in sales, they're significant.
Yeah, and it's a very simple question, is how else can we help you? We're already doing business. How else can I help you do what you're trying to do? And the more ways you have to help, the more you can establish new lines of business with that existing customer. The best marketing processes, at the end of that marketing process, the sales process is extremely fast and very easy. Because you've already found the right person, you've qualified them that they're going to be a good fit, they already value what you have to offer, so it's mostly a matter of figuring out what the exact terms of the relationship are going to be, but they're mostly sold on working with you before they ever get to talk to you in the sales process. Video can help with that as a tactic, because it lets people know a little bit more of who you are and what you're all about.
Reactivation. Questions for reflection. How long has it been since you've presented an offer to your previous customers? How can you convince lapsed customers to purchase from you again?
Starting to see the psychology of actually working in the business, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit. Starting to see the benefits of systems, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit. The hardest parts of running a business aren't necessarily the nuts and bolts thing, it's the people part and the systems part.